I guess it started early for me. Look at that. That's what you call Flintstone powered. And of course, the one on the right. You can see the anticipation. The coming gearhead. Finally, my teenage years grown up in Silver Lake, Glendale area. Here I am with my good friends from our neighborhood. They're all there to help me out. This is how I started. Of course, the usual Ford and Chevy, but mostly Mustangs, Ford Fox bodies, LA street racers, running hard, turbo, street cars. Eventually stuff got serious, so there we go. Racing for Ford Motorsports through Kaufman Products. Then the 5.0 revolution was rolling pretty doggone big. And that's my car on the right. And the other road racing cars of Kaufman Products, sponsored by Ford Motorsports. Of course, me at Palmdale breaking in the new 347 engine I just put together with the then experimental prototype trick flow twisted wedge heads. We got it working this time and made pretty good power. For a shootout at sundown, right there at Bakersfield, this is the heyday of the 5.0 versus Grand National through the 90s that started the new muscle car revolution. And all through that Mustang craziness, helped out with a book by Isaac Martin for HP Books. Everybody wanted to know what is going on with this new Mustangs and their Windsor engines. And here's one of the books I was involved with. Our 5.0, sponsored by Storm & Norman, Pro Mustang, with the official program of the Fun Ford Weekend, where I won a bunch of races here on the West Coast. First 10, 9-second pass, highest mile an hour for the event, and of course winning the race. All the races on the West Coast. Please subscribe, like, and share. Today we'll talk about 8.2 deck blocks from Ford Motorsports, or Ford in general. Now, a lot of you are probably unaware that the stock block has skirt length of 4975. That is fairly long for a stock production block, especially with an 8.2 deck. Now when you look at that configuration, Dart comes up with an 8.2 deck aftermarket block, basically to supersede the stock week block, and it's 4935 or 930. That is actually shorter than production length. And I don't know if I should say that's an excuse. I don't think so. The more you can support the piston on the way down to the bore, the better if you're going to be, especially at high RPM. When you're running stroker crank in a long rod, that helps you out. Now that's it. What we have here is another block, the Boss 302. That is at 4730, much shorter. And I don't know what they were thinking about or what they had in mind, or maybe when they casted this thing, they're not talking to the racers themselves. They're just casting it for the sake of casting it. You know, they looked at the oiling system, addressed that. But the main thing is still the block cylinder length. Too short, as I showed on this intro of this video. There's no excuse for that. And I'm rather disappointed with the Boss 302 block. I wonder how the other Ford Motorsport block pairs up. Basically what the indication is, the Dart block, you have to cut the bottom of the cylinders to clear the rod when it's going around during the stroke, like a 331 or 325, excuse me, or 3400. And I run with a Motorsport block, a 3480, but I run a 5500 long rod just to keep the piston above the bottom of the cylinder skirt, especially with a 3480. I'm trying to push it up as high as I could. Now the ring pack becomes tight. Well, either you opt for a single ring layout with, I would say, a 2 or 3 millimeter oil control ring with a single ring, or even with the 2-3 ring setup, I think it'd be fine as long as you play your rod length correctly. It's rather disappointing, to say the least, and I don't know, I think some of the manufacturers are not talking to the racers themselves when they do this kind of stuff. And again, I will state here, on the stock block, I like the 1.5 firing order be removed for a 1.3, because you're getting the full force of the 1.5 on the front cylinder. The 1.5 hit is just hard on the 2-bolt main cap on front, plus the fact that you have that oil galley on top of the main cap studs or bolts. That makes it weak, and I'll highlight that here. But I'm just touching base on what we're going to do. And remember also, when you're losing number 2 cap, when you're losing number 2 cam bearing, sometimes number 4, look closely. When those start to wiggle out, number 2 main cap is probably cracked, and I've seen it crack more than a number 4. Because when the crank at high RPM and lots of horsepower, the crank wants to turn to an S, especially if it's not center counterweighted. There's no center counterweights. Standard 28 or 50, they tend to twist to an S, and it loads up number 2 and number 4. So when you look at 1, 3, and 5 looks good, 2 and 4, that's a big question mark. So usually I'll do a quick check. I pull number 2, number 4 cap. If they look good, 1, 3, and 5 should be pretty doggone safe, as long as there's no contaminants there or bearing that fell apart. But otherwise, if everything being normal, if 2 and 4 looks good, 1, 3, and 5 definitely will be. Now, that's why I stress the importance of the firing order on stock production blocks. Otherwise, when you have a motorsport block, dart, whatever, or even the aluminum block with the front support, it's important that you also mind that the 1 and 5 or avoiding the 1 and 5 firing orders not an issue anymore. You got plenty of meat there. Okay, it's just that I'm concerned about this doggone stock production block. They're really, really thin. The oiling system on these blocks are pretty good. My only concern is one of these aftermarket blocks. Make sure that you can check that there is a provision there for the oil to drain to the distributor gear. And one of these motorsport blocks or aftermarket block didn't have that provision. So I suggest that you do all sorts of attention, drilling a hole on the front oil galley right behind the distributor gear. Just a little tiny hole, doesn't need to be the smallest drill you can get. If you have to go to the hardware store and get a super thin one, it doesn't take much. Alright? Anything else? I would say run a standard pressure oil pump. It don't have to be high volume like we used to do in the old days. All the machining techniques today are more accurate, not like before. You know, everything's super low quality type of machine shops, or I suggest that everybody takes and pay attention to the oiling system, running an external line if need be to the bottom of the oil, to the oil galley, or an external line going from the front of the block to beside the distributor and plugging it through straight there on the driver's side of the oiling system. All that would definitely help, and I see no reason to really run a high volume oil pump these days, except maybe for extreme situation where you're expecting this doggone turbo blown or whatever nitrous car, and you expect to live it there for 100,000 miles plus. Okay, otherwise I'd stay with the stock oil pump, except for those kind of situations where you really I'm not going to tell you, you want it to stay there for a long, long time before you split open the block again in many, many years later. I'm going to show something here. I don't have a cameraman, so I got to look down like this. Here's one issue I have with the Ford Motorsport block. Maybe it's not an issue to many of you, but this will come as a shocker. Here it is. I'll measure the cylinder wall length, especially for you guys who want to run short rod, long stroke, 5.315 rod length with a 3.400. I ran these things up to a 3.480 like a small block Chevy, and then I ran a 5.500. I think it was an Eagle rod back then with a 2-inch journal. That's what I use. But here we go. Let's look at this. We will be looking at all 3 Ford blocks. All right. And this is a stock 5.0. I'm going to explain some of the design shortcomings with it, the improvements on the SHP, or basically there's a Boss 302 Ford Motorsport block. The SHP, like a budget dart block, and of course the aluminum. Okay, we will try to explain as best we could how it starts. Okay, here's a 5.0 HO roller. Wow. The stock HO. $4,975. $4,975. Out of curiosity, I would like to know how far does this cylinder wall go down, okay, compared to the stock Ford or stock HO 302. Let's see. This is a dart block? No. Yeah, this is the dart block. Let's see how far down the cylinder wall goes on this one. Okay, let me measure it down. It's not precise, but I'm just putting my finger there as a stop. And 4,930 roughly. Let's see the Ford. Let's see the cylinder wall on the Ford Motorsports. Okay, I'm using 4,730. And the other one was a lot more. Big difference. That Ford Motorsport is a lot shorter. So I wonder. So we're looking at 4.975 for the stock HO block cylinder length, 4.930 on the dart, and the Boss 302 is the shortest at 4.730. Between those, you can see the difference. Why is this aftermarket blocks have shorter cylinder than the stockers? Amazing. We will be looking at all 3 Ford blocks. All right, and this is a stock 5.0. I'm going to explain some of the design shortcomings with it, the improvements on the SHP, or basically there's a Boss 302 Ford Motorsport block. The SHP, like a budget dart block, and of course the aluminum. Okay, we will try to explain as best we could how it starts. Okay, here's a 5.0 HO roller. When you look at the weak part of this configuration is right here. It's very, very thin. Okay, plus the fact that it has a drilled
passage right there, that drilled passage weakens the whole design, because right here you have the #1 main cap bolt. It goes directly in front of, okay, look at that. You have that #1 main cap bolt. It basically runs through this drilled oil galley here. Very weak. Plus it doesn't have much area of what I call that, meat there. I drilled one of my stock blocks that's been sitting around a lot for a long time. And take note of how thin this part of the casting is. There is not much there. And so as opposed to the motorsport or aftermarket blocks, there's a lot more beef there. This is very thin. So, as opposed to the Boss 302, look at that. Alright? It looks big here, but actually gets real narrow there. It's not as big, but you have this main support, which is lacking there. Now, that said, with the SHP, it also has the main support. Very important. And look at here. You got an oil line, probably perhaps to the supercharger or turbocharger, and right there is your oil pressure reference. And here's an aluminum block. It's kind of big there, but it narrows down as well. And you have this massive support. Very important. The main oil's right there. Is like here and right here. Okay? And same thing with the stock. But the difference is I convert this to screw-in plugs, whereas this one's here got threads, lacking with the factory block. Same thing here. Alright? So, of course, the aluminum block. Now, when you look at the oil line, it feeds all the way, the main oil feeds all the way to the back, goes up this crossover, at the meantime also feeds this back. Then it goes here and feeds this other back. What you're going to have issue with is when you use this block for racing, these lifters here start to starve. They're the last in line. There's a constant leakage on all the lifter bores. With no line here, this one starves. So I do modifications for them. I do an external line from the back and feed this front. And sometimes I run an external line from the feed line to the side of the distributor, and I basically drill a passage and runs right there. Now here, same thing, it feeds underneath, feeds here, but you have a crossover. There's the crossover from the main feed, and it goes there and feeds the other side. Alright? And there's a reference there for oil pressure. Now we have an issue here. It don't look like it has a crossover line, but it does. Right above that lifter bore, you have a line that goes straight to here. That is the crossover. Okay, the crossover from here to there. You can see a little bulge there, and that's also on the same line. Okay, so it don't look like it, but you do have a crossover. All right, that's being fed from this side to that side. So really, as soon as it gets from the oil pump to the main passage, it feeds right here and goes straight to the front lifter. Now, here on the SHP, this is a budget. You do have the crossover back here. There is the crossover on this block on the very back. Looks like the stock configuration. All right, so it's pretty effective, but we have one other problem with this thing. You have nothing on the front. There's no feed line. Let me see that. This doesn't have any front crossover from what I can see. All right, so it's a budget high performance race block. I also do an external line from there to here, or from the outside drilled there, and I direct feed this side of the lifters. All right, so that is one issue with the HHP, but it is a budget block, so you get what you pay for. All right. Take note, this is how I routed my oil lines to keep the lifters alive at high RPM, but this is from about 25, 30 years ago, or 20 years ago, something like that. It's been a long time, but look at how this is. It's still, this one here has the front crossover, believe it or not. All right, so I still had to supplement and add additional lines. All right, now this aluminum block has a crossover right there. You can see it, and then it feeds directly to that lift. Crossover to the back as well, just like the stock configuration. So this is a good oiling system, like the Chevrolets. Chevy small block, big block have a good oiling system. The Fords, especially Cleveland's, totally different. So there we are. Okay, now let's look at the bottom end. Obviously, 2-bolt main, 4-bolt main with splayed bolts for more strength, 4-bolt main, and the aluminum block is also a 4-bolt main. Excellent, a lot of beef. When you look at here, the big drawback is it's almost, look at this. All right, you're looking at, it's hollowed out, very weak. All right, so you have no support right here. And then of course, like I was saying, with the number 1-5 firing order, this thing takes a dump. All right, 1-5. I avoid with a stock production block running a 1-5. I run the 1-3 firing order, so it doesn't load the main cap. And usually when you have the stock production block and you see this slip, the number 2 and number 4 cam bearing, check this closely, because 2 and 4 takes the brunt of the crank twisting to an S, and they start to crack. And when they do crack, look, it's hollow right there as well. No support. Okay, no support here, no support there, no support here, but there's one on the other side. Now what happens here, when this one starts to slip off and you see it move forward, check this for a crack. Now when we look at the Ford Motorsport, look how thick that is. Lots of support on the bottom end. Okay, so, and then the splayed caps, this is running a 2-inch rod journal here. You can tell they're kind of small. They save a little bit of power without sacrificing strength. There's a custom scat crank made for me with a 2-inch journal instead of the usual 2-100. And over here on the dart, same thing. All right, got a lot of meat, but seemed like this one's a little bit thicker than the Ford Motorsport, much thicker. This is great also, but that is seems to be a lot beefier. There you go. So you can see it. And over here in the aluminum, yes, like the dart, I mean the Ford Motorsport, it's very thick right here. All right, lots of support. They're not so, but still. When we look at the for motorsport, there's no need to clearance. There's no need to clearance the connecting rod to the bottom of the cylinder wall. When we look at the dart, you can see the clearancing done to clear the rod. Okay, on all 8 cylinders right there, which is not there on the Ford Motorsport. It's just a lot shorter. Now let's look at the front, the ever important front oil galley that feeds the lifters on the front of the block and the timing chain, keeps it lubed. Spillover oil from the lifter valley goes there, and sometimes I relieve that there so that it lubricates and drips down to the distributor gear. Okay, also the number 1 journal, splash oil into the gear, but it also helps with that little hole for drain. Now here with the Ford Motorsports, here we have the Ford Racing Boss 302 block. It also takes distributor lubrication for the number 1 rod when it's swinging around. There's nothing up front, nothing here, no drain. Alright, so what I do is I drill a little orifice right there, small hole to lubricate the distributor gear. Here it don't seem like it, it's closed, but when you look closer you'll see there's a little hole right there. That is the drain for the distributor. Okay, I'd make that a little bit larger as far as me. Now that's as cast, but it's better than nothing. Okay, so also there's lubrication from the number 1 rod, and here we'll see there's no drain back to the distributor. So again, I will do the same thing. I'll drill a hole to that 1 plug there so that it'll squirt a little bit of oil to the distributor. Well, what I like to point out is on this aftermarket block, and in this particular example here, the HHP, you have a pretty darn good amount of material here, okay, for support. It used to be that I used to have blown head gaskets happening with a lot of horsepower, and the older motorsport blocks and dark blocks didn't have this kind of material supporting the bottom of the head gasket as well as the top. See, right there also got a lot more. And let's look at the Boss 302 block. Here we have the Boss 302 block. It's not quite as wide around this area, alright, even to the top. It's fair, okay, but I'm concerned here because it's really super hot right around the exhaust port. And I used to have failures years and years ago right here. It will start to discolorate. In fact, I did show that also on that big block 460 where it started leaking there. And then basically the big block 460 is a Windsor block, though bigger. And when you look at that as opposed to this, there's a big difference, okay? And the amount of casting that are there, and I think you can drill here for an extra bolt, and even there when you run an added bolt pattern for boost, heavy nitrous, or blower. Okay, so that's what we're looking at here, guys. Look at the factory freeze plug right there. It's okay. But what I do when I install it, I do this. I heat up the general area to about 180, 200. And as soon as it's at 200, as it hits 200, I put my deep freeze plug, not the narrow one, with the deep freeze plug, and I punch it in. And when it cools down real quick, it grabs the freeze plug. Because if you push it in cold, well, guess what? It can't probably slip off. Now when you heat it up, it expands the cast iron or the block, and then you have a cold freeze plug. You push it in there, it goes in easier. You don't have to mangle it. It slips in there easier, and then when it's cold, it grabs it. All right? So that's one way of putting the spark plug. Now, here on the Ford Motorsports, look at here. Beautiful. They have this threaded jobbers there. Okay? And here, I thread that to a regular plug like the one on the crossover on the back. I thread all of them, 1, 2, 3. Here, guess what? Pretty nice. Okay, it's got a rubber O-ring. You put it in there. And then with the threaded freeze plug, great. Here on the dart, if you can convert, why not? But here you can run a deep freeze plug. Again, I heat them up to about 180, 200. When it's expanded, then I push a cold freeze plug in there. Then, of course, it grabs it. On the aluminum block, beautiful, like the Ford Motorsports. Okay? This keeps the whole block rigid as well, as opposed to a regular freeze plug. Okay? So again, this one here is threaded. It's pretty good. Threaded here as well. Okay? So, it's very impressive.